DMT binds to a specific receptor site in the brain, the serotonin 2A receptor site, also the serotonin 2C to a lesser extent. And the highest density of these 5-HT2A receptors are in the visual cortex and in the medial temporal lobe around the memory complex. And within these areas, the highest density of these receptors are in the apical dendrites of the neocortical layers. These dendrites are like trees where all sense information coming into the body filters up through the neuronal layers into these trees. And this is where sensation is felt. All of the information that hits these apical dendrites is then filtered down and sent forward to your working memory so you can see things in real time. What I think that DMT and other psychedelics do is they stimulate a feedback process in the layer 5 neurons that take information from the apical dendrites and feed them forward and laterally through the brain to different areas for processing. Another aspect of these layer 5 pyramidal cells is that they have recurrent collaterals which lead back up into the apical dendrites. So when information filters down, if there's any ambiguous data sets, it can send an exciting impulse back up into the apical dendrites and say, hey, let's go over that again. What I think that psychedelics do is they stimulate this recurrent feedback process. So any data set that enters the mind is re-articulated over and over and over in almost a fractally recurrent process. In addition to that, the feedback excitation knocks out something called lateral inhibition, which keeps your attention focused on a single detail, like a line resolution. If lateral inhibition is knocked out, lines suddenly become wavy, textures begin to fade, begin to crawl, depth of field becomes back and forth like this. And so when you have lateral inhibition knocked out, that's what you would call a very mild hallucinogenic experience when you've got, melting walls and creeping carpets. But when you get into the peak and you've got this sort of fully formed hallucinogenic state, I think that you've got a recurrent feedback excitation going on, not just within the cortical layers, but between the visual cortex and the memory processing complex in the medial temporal lobe. So you've got this very, very fast, high speed, probably up in the high gamma range, feedback between your memory complex and your visual cortex, so that anything that you think is immediately brought into visual memory. And when you focus on that in visual memory, it becomes more articulate and more detailed. And the longer you focus on it, the more detailed and the more articulated it becomes until you perturb the feedback cycle, and then it all fades away. But once you sit and focus again, it comes back up, and you can actually feel the feedback intensity process going up in your brain as you sit and focus in the psychedelic state. And as the feedback process goes up, the visuals become more intense and more lifelike and more real. But once you perturb that feedback process in your brain, it all wipes. Your visual memory buffer wipes, and it has to start over again. So, in a practical sense, if you're on psychedelics and you're up and walking around and doing things, you're not going to be up in the high hallucinatory state, because there's too much perturbing that feedback cycle. There's too much information coming through. But once you lie down, close your eyes, and relax, there's nothing to perturb that feedback cycle. So you shoot straight up into this visual space. Now, I've been working on this theory for a couple years, and when I was in Tucson at the consciousness conference there, I talked to Frank Eichenhofer. Do you know Frank Eichenhofer? Frank Eichenhofer went to the Amazon to study people under the influence of ayahuasca in Peru under the auspices of the Hefter Society. And he hooked them up to brainwave scanners to see what kind of activity was going on in the brain. And what he found was that under the influence of ayahuasca, there was this sort of peaking up of brainwave activity that went all the way up to about 65 to 80 hertz at the peak of the experience. And he confirmed for me that the brainwave cycles would shoot up immediately when people lied down and sat still. And once they started moving around and sitting up or talking, they would come back down. And that made me think, well, of course, that's it. That's because they're going into this feedback process that's running away in their brain while they're sitting still. And the minute there's any sort of muscle movement or any other sort of neural firing going on, it stops the feedback process. And when I told him about my theory, he said that, that sounds right. I'd like to see some more on that. And that's sort of where we are right now. I don't have enough actual research material to say, yes, this is what's happening. And I don't have enough brainwave data to actually run the statistics and do it and figuring out what's going on. But we're getting there. We're getting to the point where we can say that, yes, this is the way the brain cycles up, and these are the frequencies that it locks into when it's in this feedback state.